Hello, my name's Colin and I'm here to tell you a little bit about the tabernacle in the Bible as described in Exodus and some other places in the Bible, but mostly Exodus. And I'm going to look at the plan of the tabernacle. And this came about because I was thinking about Revelation 21, funnily enough, and how the New Jerusalem is described as a cube. And it got me, I remembered thinking about that, how in Jewish thinking a square is representing perfection because it's kind of like a perfect shape in often, you can think of it as a perfect shape. So if a square represents perfection, that got me thinking about the tabernacle. And I remember thinking, yeah, there's a couple of things in the tabernacle that are, when viewed from above, square. And did a little bit of digging around and I found this diagram which I'm going to slowly reveal to you. The diagram that I'm going to show you is based on some I've seen on the internet. I'm not sure exactly where the origins of these are because I haven't found, there's a few different versions of it and I'm not sure which one came first. Otherwise, if I knew, I would attribute that, but I'm not sure, so I'm not going to do that. So if I slowly reveal this to you, so first of all, the tabernacle is made it's made up of what's called an outer courtyard, which is made with poles and sort of linen strung between them to make a courtyard and a kind of gateway on this side. But anyway, the actual dimensions are 100 cubits by 50 cubits to make up the temple, the tabernacle courtyard. So right away you could argue, well, that's definitely not a square, that's a rectangle. But if you think about it, it's kind of two 50 by 50 squares next to one another, and that's how I'm going to look at it. 250 by 50 squares just next to one another. Now if we take that and we place the tabernacle tent just in the middle, so that the door, which would be here, the door here would be right in the middle of this rectangle, so it's on the edge of one of these squares on this dimension, but in the center in this dimension. If we do place it there, then the Holy of Holies, or the most holy place, which is a square, which is one of the squares I was thinking of, so that's a 10 by 10 cubit square, then that Holy of Holies would land there. And what's interesting about that is if you do diagonal lines to find out the center of this particular square, the big square, then the Holy of Holies ends up being right in the center of that square on the left. And presumably the only thing that was in the Holy of Holies was the Ark of the Covenant, and I think it's fairly reasonable to assume that this would be placed in the center of the Holy of Holies, which would make it in the center of this square here. So that's quite amazing, and I think that does talk of, if squares represent perfection, you've got a square and then you've got a square and you've got something right at the center of the square of the squares. So you've kind of got lots of perfection going on there. Anyway, let's look at the other side. Now, if we find the center of that, now we're not told exactly, we're told what was in there, but we're not told exactly where it was placed. But I am kind of assuming that the altar of sacrifice was placed at the center of this square. I think that makes sense. And if it was, then this altar of sacrifice, which was a 5 by 5 cubit square from above, So this square is again at the center of this square. So again, I think that talks of perfection. And the altar of sacrifice, I believe, is representing Jesus's perfect sacrifice for our sin on the cross, his death and resurrection. And if that's the case, then the square does fit in that with that, the perfect offering for our sin. So if we have this square here, the altar of sacrifice is where they would burn animals as an offering to God. And when you burn anything, and certainly the animals would have been no exception to this, then you would get ash in the bottom, and you would have, but most of it would have been burnt and end up as, you know, as kind of smoke into the air, to the atmosphere. And I think this does talk of Jesus's body going down to the earth or to the hell. It talks about Jesus going down to hell and being raised again into the heavenlies, and I think both the ash and the smoke going up speak of that. Anyway, we've got Jesus' perfect sacrifice for sin spoken of by the altar of sacrifice. The only other piece of furniture in this particular half of the tabernacle courtyard would have been the laver, and the laver was used by the priest to wash, and they needed to do that before going through the door to the holy place. We don't know exactly how big the laver was. I've kind of drawn it that big, and that's why there's no dimensions. We don't know how, so yeah, and I've drawn it exactly halfway between the two. Again, I don't know if that's actually true, but it could well have been. Now, in the holy place, there was three things. One of the things, the first thing I'm going to look at, is this, which is the altar of incense. And viewed from above, that was 1 cubit by 1 cubit. Again, a perfect square. So we've got this perfect thing here, and this perfect thing here, and this perfect thing here. This perfect thing here, this is the altar of sacrifice, this is the altar of incense. So again, there was burning taking place, but not of animals, not the blood of bulls and goats or any animals like that. It was incense that was burnt. So there was a burning, but it was incense, and it, you know, that ascended into and filled the holy place. I think this speaks of the ascension of Jesus after his time on earth into heaven. I think this side speaks more of the heavenly realm, and this is of the earthly realm. So I think this is the altar sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, and this is the ascension into heaven. Just for completeness, I'm going to, this is the dimensions of the table of showbread. You could argue again that, well, that's not a square. Well, it's not, but it is like the whole tabernacle courtyard, and also the holy place is two squares next to one another. So the ratio of 2 to 1, 2 to 1, and 2 to 1 is replicated on the table of showbread. And the last piece of furniture is the menorah. Like the laver, we don't know exactly how big that was because the dimensions haven't been given in the Bible. But it's interesting then that the washing that the laver represents, and the light of the world, as it were, the light given by the menorah, both without measure. They're given without measure because then there are no dimensions given. And the light, of course, was meant to be lit, meant to be illuminating the place 24/7 while the tabernacle tent was up. So I thought those dimensions and the placing particularly of those dimensions of the articles was quite amazing, and seeing how it all geometrically lines up, I think it's pretty amazing. So I hope you find that amazing too. And just to finish, I'm going to show you some photographs of the call to prayer tabernacle. This was the gate, which was the way in to the courtyard area. The white sheets here are the courtyard, or make up the courtyard, and you can go through here into the courtyard area, and the first thing you would be met with is the altar of sacrifice, which is represented here. By the way, as close as we could, we made all of these things the dimensions given in the Bible. And here you can just see the edge there, and you can also see here, this is the representation of the laver. We don't know how big it was, so we just made it that big. And this is the doorway into the tabernacle tent, to the holy place. And in the holy place, one thing you would have seen was the menorah, as I said. This is our representation of that. You would have seen the altar of incense, which I mentioned earlier. You can also see we've been visited by a mannequin of the high priest, and you can also see the veil, which was the divider between the holy place and the most holy place. And if you went through the veil, you would go to the most holy place, and there was the Ark of the Covenant, a box containing the 10 Commandments, 2 tablets of stone with 10 commandments on them, and I believe they were the same. They were 2 copies of the same. That's another talk though. And on the Ark of the Covenant were the cherubim, which make something called the mercy seat. These had wings stretching out towards one another, and this is again a reason why I think this represents Jesus' ascension into heaven, because this was the seat of God, and it talks about Jesus being seated at the right hand of God. He ascended and is seated at the right hand of God. So yeah, this is why I think this talks more of the ascension rather than the death and resurrection, which would be more this of Jesus Christ. Well, I hope you found that interesting, and thanks for listening if you've made it this far. Bye for now.